Okay, well, welcome everyone. Like I just said, we're really glad to see you all here. It's always nice to have a crowd, especially for a discussion. So tonight we're going to read a poem together, and Sushmita's put together a lovely slideshow to go with the words. And we're going to read, it's called Sometimes a Wild God by Tom Hirons. And we just looked up his name, so I know I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sometimes a Wild God by Tom Hirons. And if you're here, it's probably because the title of the poem drew you here. So our task really is going to be to just take it in and notice what comes up for us around the poem. And there's no wrong way to respond to it if you haven't read it yet, and you don't know what you're in for. There's no wrong response. So it's just noticing, and Sushmita and I have very different personalities, and so we automatically respond to the poem very differently. So I just want to put that invitation out there. It's just about noticing. And Sushmita will start that, and then afterwards I'll take us through kind of a brief little meditation with some questions to help us get in touch with our response, and then we'll have a time for sharing. Anything else, Sushmita, or you think that's?
I think that's enough, except would you want people to have pen and paper handy? Or you think it's not necessary?
I don't think it's necessary. I think if folks want to, they can, but it's okay.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to read this poem. I also dropped it as a PDF in chat, so if you want to have it in front of you, you can. And I'm going to read it slowly. It's a long poem. So the invitation is to let the words wash over you. You don't have to capture every single line of it. See what speaks to you. Okay, so the poem is Sometimes a Wild God. Sometimes a wild god comes to the table. He's awkward and does not know the ways of porcelain, of fork and mustard and silver. His voice makes vinegar from wine. When the wild god arrives at the door, you will probably fear him. He reminds you of something dark that you might have dreamt, or the secret you do not wish to be shared. He will not ring the doorbell. Instead, he scrapes with his fingers, leaving blood on the paintwork. Though primroses grow in circles round his feet. You do not want to let him in. You are very busy. It is late or early, and besides, you cannot look at him straight because he makes you want to cry. Your dog barks, the wild god smiles. He holds out his hand and the dog licks his wounds, then leads him inside. The wild god stands in your kitchen. Ivy is taking over your sideboard. Mistletoe has moved into the lampshades. And wrens have begun to sing an old song in the mouth of your kettle. I haven't much, you say, and give him the worst of your food. He sits at the table bleeding. He coughs up foxes. There are otters in his eyes. When your wife calls down, you close the door and tell her it's fine. You will not let her see the strange guest at your table. The wild god asks for whiskey, and you pour a glass for him, then a glass for yourself. 3 snakes are beginning to nest in your voice box. You cough. O limitless space, O eternal mystery, O endless cycles of death and rebirth, O miracle of life, O the wondrous dance of it all. You cough again, expectorate the snakes, and water down the whiskey, wondering how you got so old and where your passion went. The wild god reaches into a bag made of moles and nightingale skin. He pulls out a 2-reeded pipe, raises an eyebrow, and all the birds begin to sing. The fox leaps into your eyes, otters rush from the darkness. The snakes pour through your body. Your dog howls, and upstairs, your wife both exults and weeps at once. The wild god dances with your dog. You dance with the sparrows. A white stag pulls up a stool and bellows hymns to enchantments. A pelican leaps from chair to chair. In the distance, warriors pour from their tombs. Ancient gold grows like grass in the fields. Everyone dreams the words of long forgotten songs. The hills echo and the gray stones ring with laughter and madness and pain. In the middle of the dance, the house takes off from the ground. Clouds climb through the windows. Lightning pounds its fists on the table, and the moon leans in. The wild god points to your side. You are bleeding heavily. You have been bleeding for a long time, possibly since you were born. There is a bear in the wound. Why did you leave me to die? Asks the wild god. And you say, I was busy surviving. The shops were all closed. I didn't know how. I am sorry. Listen to them. The fox in your neck, and the snakes in your arms, and the wren and the sparrow and the deer, the great unnameable beasts in your liver and your kidneys and your heart. There is a symphony of howling, a cacophony of dissent. The wild god nods his head, and you wake on the floor, holding a knife, a bottle, and a handful of black fur. Your dog is asleep on the table. Your wife is stirring far above. Your cheeks are wet with tears. Your mouth aches from laughter or shouting. A black bear is sitting by the fire. Sometimes a wild god comes to the table. He's awkward and does not know the ways of porcelain, of fork and mustard and silver. His voice makes vinegar from wine and brings the dead to life.
Thank you, Sushmita. So let's take a moment now, and if you want to close your eyes, it might help you focus inwardly. or you can just have soft eyes gazing. And I'm going to invite us, first of all, to consider, to just lean into the feeling of the poem. There may be some words that stand out, and there may not be any words. You may be left with a feeling. And let's just give ourselves an opportunity to ask some questions and see what comes up. And the first one we'll start with is there a sound that shows up for you when you lean into this space of this poem? And so we want to just create some space here and allow whatever wants to show up to show up. And just check in and see if there's a sound that shows up for you as you consider how this poem makes you feel. And just let that sound be there. Then I want to invite us to consider, is there a motion or a movement that your body feels like it wants to make in response to this poem? And I'm going to leave a space now to just sit with that question and see if something shows up, and just to imagine the motion, or if you want to make the motion, you can, any action or motion that wants to happen in response to this poem. And next, let's check in with our sense of smell. Does this poem smell like anything? Do any smells come up for you? And I'll leave space for that too, and just see if anything shows up. Next, are there any words that capture for you the essence of your response to this poem? Do words show up? Does a phrase show up? What comes up in language? Let's make space for that. And then next and finally, if there's any way that those elements seek to come together, sound, words, motion, smell, anything that has to do with our senses or experience of this poem, just let that be there now, and how those elements might come together. And when you're ready, let's just gently open your eyes and come back into the space. And we will invite a time for sharing now. And the sharing can be something that you experienced as you heard the poem read by Sushmita. It can be something you experienced just now in this meditation. Whatever's arising for you around this experience of the poem, we'll just open up. Yeah, I think, and David is sharing in the chat that just feel free to unmute yourself and share when you're ready. And it's fine to have periods of silence in between the sharing, and we'll just trust and wait. Whenever anyone wants to share, please feel free.
What came up for me almost immediately were the words from The Guest House by Rumi. So much of this made me think of the guest house. So that was my sound and the words. My sense of smell was of the animals, and my gesture was open arms.
Thank you, Daddy.
Interesting that you said the guest house, because my reaction was a Dr. Seuss book, to think that I saw it on Mulberry Street. This was like a whimsical nightmare. And the smell definitely was of the animals and rankness. It was fascinating. My gesture at first was this. I wanted to push it away. Yeah, thanks for this offering.
Thank you, Susie.
Let's see. So, horned one, Lord, I smell the leaves in the forest and pine and musk and sweat and male and hunger and earth and blood. My gestures are take me away. And yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now. This is an important poem for me.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you. Yeah, Lisa, you can just unmute.
Oh, okay. That, yeah, I was surprised how physical it felt. And I felt like, you know, kind of, it took me on this journey, and then sometimes it sort of clanged and was uncomfortable. Like I didn't like the foxes coming out of his nose or whatever. It was like, no. And then later when the snakes were coming out of the arms, I was like, no, but it was the throat. I was good with the throat. I was in that image. And then the porcelain and the utensils were like starting smooth and then getting clangy and irritating. And just then the scraping and the blood and the primroses at his feet and make me think of rain. I can smell rain. And then the stupid foxes, like in the otters. I'm like, dude, like get back in the poem. So get your head in the game. And then at the end, it was all fire. I don't remember the words, but it seemed to be a lot of fire. Yeah, so definitely, I'd love to hear it again. Great bedtime story.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Not sure about the great bedtime story part. It might give you nightmares. It'll be a creative dream for sure. Thanks.
So I had a sense, this is Jenny. Yeah, it initially felt whimsical. The first couple lines, I was thinking, oh, how precious this wild God and the porcelain and the silver. And then it went dark, and I found myself actually really tense when Darby invited movement. I think I was kind of holding my breath, and I didn't realize that until the invitation to what do you need to do right now? And I thought, I need to get back to my son. I took the deepest breath I've probably taken all day. And yeah, it felt to me, I'm not a horror movie kind of person. And so it felt very horror movie-ish kind of to me. So it was difficult. But then I'd get caught off guard by, pelicans jumping from chair to chair or something like that. And I just happened last year, I had the opportunity to spend some time in the Galapagos Islands, and the pelicans were just, so I was all of a sudden like in the Galapagos Islands in the middle of this horror story. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. So the other thing was that sense of just not knowing what was coming. I'm laughing at the beginning, horrified, then kind of on vacation, and then back to the horror. And then we end with that little whimsical, the wild god and the porcelain. I loved Dottie's reference to the guest house, because I hadn't thought of that, but as soon as you said that, I thought, yeah, that felt like, furniture being thrown about and all that would be noisy in that sense. But yeah, it was disconcerting.
Thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome.
Yeah. This is definitely a guest that demands whiskey.
I didn't know you could feel that way. I was alarmed, and I was like, what did I sign up for? Why am I here? Because I have a dog. I have no problem with animals as long as they're outside the window. I will donate to the animals. I've got no problem with the animals as long as they don't bother me. I don't bother them. I do not do horror movies of any kind. I told my children that Harry Potter was the devil. Okay? It's just so scaring. It's just, ooh. So I'm sitting here going, this is not good. This is the first not good I've had with one spirit. This is not good. And then I was like, because I was imagining blood and gore and what have you. And I was like, why are you like this, God? Couldn't you clean this up before you brought me in here? So I want to thank you for the bloodbath. I will be thinking about you later, and the poem later, and visualizing and compartmentalizing. So I'm here to learn. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Jackie.
Hi. It reminded me of the childhood book Where the Wild Things Are with Max, and the whole adventure that he went on. And then the movement and the smell reminded me of swimming through mucky water, and just that was it. That's all I pictured, was swimming through mucky water in Max. So that's it. Thank you.
And were you swimming with them, or were you observing? What would be your vantage?
I was observing it, and just like it was like an urge to just swim through mucky water, and just the smell of it, and from an observational point of view. So yeah.
Thank you, Dominic Faith.
You're welcome.
Having read a lot of
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, having
Dave.
read a lot of Greek tragedy, in fact, I've read all of them that still exist. This reminded me so much of a poem about Dionysus or Bacchus. In all ways, it's very earthy, it's very wild, it's unpredictable, and at times bloody. But the Greeks somehow encapsulated all of that into somebody they actually worshipped, and thought was vital to their culture. So that's my contribution.
Thank you, David. That's great that you named Dionysus. And in Greece, you could not go to Apollo's temple or Athena's temple without first paying your homage to Dionysus. Dionysus' temple would be at the lowest level of the Acropolis. So you pay your homage there, and then you go up to the lighter gods. So that's interesting.
When you mentioned what do you smell, we lived in the Poconos for 15 years. So I know what it smells like. I could smell that there's a bear around or what have you. And didn't know that that was an okay reaction because it was happening so quickly. I'm reminded that I like the fall and the smells of the fall, the autumn. And I can tell the difference with the different animals as they're moving around. And I, living in New Jersey now, crave the quiet and stillness of the snow days in the Poconos because everything would shut down except for the animals and the folks that knew how to move around in that environment. And I learned to do it, but I always felt like I didn't belong. And I'm reminded that I did do it and I did survive. And the animals did not get me. And I'm okay. So I think I might look a little kinder out the window now and like put my hand up and say, oh, isn't it cute? And not be so fearful because we were all trying to survive in that environment. I was a guest. That was their habitat, their environment. And it was my fear that was the loudest sound. So when I think of the smell of bear and animals, I also have to remember how fast my heart is beating to get in the house. There's nothing gonna get me, but that's what I had to tell myself. So thanks again for an interesting experience. I'm not gonna be able to sleep.
Oh.
In a good way, in a good way.
Well, and that's an interesting place, isn't it? Because so often our fear keeps us from inviting the wild God to dinner. I don't know that how can I say this right? Amongst those smells are absolutely the rankness of the animals, and yet they're flowers at that God's feet. So there's both the sweetness and a horror attached to the presence of that wildness. Because there's horror, we're frightened. And I think too often from our training to be polite and to not upset the table, we let the fear slam the door on wildness instead of inviting it to dinner and seeing what it as guest and host might entertain. And I just want to notice, it's a really good poem, and thank you both for bringing that here. And also to notice what a great menagerie comes from the put and from that God. It's not just I mean, there's plenty of blood and there's plenty of wild energy, but there are wrens and songs and otters and foxes, and they come in the most unusual ways to us through the places of breathing and looking and standing and communing. And that's a kind of wildness that we don't, I guess all I'm trying to say is pretty simple, which is let's watch our places of fear and see, in fact, if that wild God is coming for a reason like bringing the dead back to life, is our fear in the way of our resurrection? That's enough.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yes. Yes. You know, David Renata made reference to Dionysus, the god of darkness, the god of orgies. And he was supposed to be, in myth, he is followed around by these feminine energy called the Maenads. And they are the wild women who tear flesh with their bare hands and eat raw flesh and party all night. And I'm grateful that this image is here, because I think one of the problems right now in spirituality is we are so focused on the opposite of Dionysian, which is the Apollonian energy. It's all about cleanliness and perfection and goodness and the heights and the color white and all of that. So this God really tells us it's all here. It is all here. And do we have the courage? As Dadi said so beautifully, do we have the courage to open the doors of the guest house? And this is not a well-behaved guest. Demands your whiskey.
And of course, Dionysius is associated with wine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I think one of the brilliant moves that the poet makes in this poem is to point out that the wild God takes your wine, your white clothing, and your feel-good spirituality and turns it into vinegar. That it's a different kind of intoxication than the one that you're getting with your trip to the liquor store, so to speak.
So Dionysus of Greek becomes Bacchus, the wine god in the Roman system. It's the same energy. And remember that alcohol, another name for alcohol is spirit. Okay, enough teaching.
Yeah, I can share that I really did not really like this poem, which is not surprising at all if you know me. I kind of landed, I think, where Jacqueline landed a little bit, like where, oh, this is, it's not the poem that I want, and therefore I can lean into the fact that it's probably the poem that I need. I want the orderly God, of course, to come. I don't want the chaotic God to come. And particularly like on the heels of the election where everything was feeling so chaotic. And now having taking like a breath and a sigh of relief that, oh, yes, things are chaotic, but they're not that chaotic as they could have become or been. So I really challenge myself to sit with this poem. One part of it I really do like is imagining the animal energies as part of me and as different parts of me. I'm wondering where the different animals land in me and what comes alive and awake around those animals. So that's the part I can really get with that part and like it. But I have a hard time with this poem. I smelled like metal. Why was I smelling metal? That's unpleasant. So anyway, yeah.
Blood smells like metal, just saying.
Ah, there you go.
If you bite your tongue,
Okay. Yeah, there you go.
I was seeing my health issues as the menacing visitor, and still was going back to the guest house. Welcome. You don't know what this will bring. And
yeah, and look at your lampshades. There may be mistletoe growing there.
mm,
You remember that's a line in this poem. Yeah, and it's no one's fault, but we really live in a sterilized world. Everything is sterile, it's clean, and comes at a real cost. I mean, I tell you, when I first came to this country and I saw everything has antibacterial hand soap, antibacterial dish soap, I'm like, what's going on here? What's wrong? And no wonder when you live in this country for 10 years, you go anywhere else, you fall sick. Because all the wild gods have been pushed away.
It's kind of like through the wildness, you can find yourself deeper, and almost like I said with the childhood story of Max,
Yes.
he went on like this adventure and pulled out his inner self and his inner strength. And you can do that with this poem the same way. If you get kind of like what David's saying, if you get past the fear and you look into it deeper, you can find strengths and inner spirituality that you would not find through that purity, because you're living almost with rosy colored glasses when you're living through that purity all the time.
And I would even go so far as to say that maybe we'll love ourselves more if you're able to invite the wild God, all the parts of ourselves that doesn't fit in what society wants or what we want via society. So, yeah. Can I be more caring to my own warts and bumps? The wild God that lives in my throat and my arms and my liver and heart and whatever else.
You know, I mentioned the pelican reference and it bringing me back to Galapagos. And one of the things that happened on that trip is that I got caught up in all the sea lion colonies are just tremendously beautiful. And they're the first thing that we saw when we arrived. Even in the plane, we could see them on the beaches. And they have these beautiful, cute faces. And so they're just so incredibly lovable animals. And it was just so much fun to see them. And then my girlfriend and I, we kayaked to each island and then camped on the island. So we were living on the ground essentially, but we're in a kayak, we're both kayaking. And then we came across a sea lion that had just caught a fish, a really huge fish. And watching this very sweet face literally tear this fish apart, diving down to drown it first and then smashing its, smashing it to break it open. I mean, it was horrifying. And yet it was part of the wildness of this, of nature, of God. And so it was a moment where I had to just accept this part of this animal as well. And So I was just thinking about that when you're talking about, you know, being able to look at those things and know that that's all part of it's all one and the same. So thank you for letting me share.
Yeah. No, thanks, Ginny, because it really reminds me of like watching dolphins play with their catch. It's a game, and they'll draw it out. Throw the fish, catch it. Throw the fish, catch it. The mom throws it to the baby. The baby throws it back. Because there is no external morality in that world. That's the other thing about these gods. They're amoral. They're not immoral, they're amoral. Thank you for bringing that image. You know, similarly, the other image that I often think about is the apple, the fruit that brought human beings away from the garden, and or whatever, some fruit, whether it's apple or pomegranate, we can argue, but the fruit. And I think that how interesting is it that we always imagine a perfectly ripe fruit. But what happens to the fruit after it has been perfectly ripe? It falls on the ground, it starts rotting, worms grow in it, it gets disassembled, goes back into the earth, so a new tree can grow someday. But in our minds, we want to harvest that fruit in its perfect ripeness, put it in the deep freeze, and we're done. And so we have sterile lives. And that's as much me as anybody else, but I'm really becoming more and more aware of this tendency to sterilize everything. And that's why when I read this poem for the first time, I was like, or actually I heard this poem in a conversation. I went and dug it up. I didn't even know of this poet until then.
When you talk about that, it makes me think about the empaths and on Facebook and all the people who are trying to keep life off of them, spiritually speaking, or ascend or transcend. And that apple just lets the most vile that exists consume it, and that's so beautiful. But we don't want to look at that part. Like the apple also allows that to happen.
That's a wonderful thought. It almost gives you the sense of a phoenix rising from the ashes, having gone through the transformation and everything and death and whatever, the power of it. Thank you.
But Miss Jackie, I am going to invite you to stop at the moment before the phoenix rises again. Stop at the ashes. With no guarantee that the phoenix is going to rise again.
For me, that is what it was to be in isolation in the holding pattern of being stuck in my depression and my anxiety and my fear, the learned helplessness of it all. And each time I venture out, I run back. So I won't allow myself to truly come on out, if you will. But I feel like I've been sitting in the ashes so long that while I should have decayed, I was polished and became something else.
Yes.
Almost as if I was hid in the cleft of the rock and became some sort of fossil. And then came out this beautiful thing, this shiny diamond, or if you will.
Yes.
My gosh, I didn't expect that.
And remember, your shiny diamond is the hardest material known. It can cut through anything.
So tired of being that brave and that strong. I just want to be, just be kind and loving and be loved back and,
Yes.
not have all these boundaries and barriers. It's exhausting.
Yeah.
But it is also fulfilling
Yes.
because when you encounter others, you recognize it and you're able to support them through it. So it is so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Another image that's coming to my mind is the chaos of a house renovation. You've ever been through that and somebody just comes in and like smashes your house all up, and it really has made me aware of how like the molding, like all that we design this really orderly, safe world that kind of keeps that wild gut. What would it be like to like let the guts of part of our house just kind of sit there? Maybe that would let some more of the wildness in, but everything's just so, we want it just so we can forget. And I'm always reminded of that when we smash something up in my house.
I'm struck by what you just shared, Darby, because I've been thinking, holding this poem and holding everyone's reflections, imagining when you're in the woods or you're walking on the lawn and you see a toadstool or a mushroom that's popped up. Or you see an ant or a trail of ants in your kitchen, or you see a spider on your doorstep. And what is our first reaction to those experiences of nature, of life force? And why I'm tying this in with what Darby said was, I was thinking in all those three instances of many humans wanting to knock the toadstool down. I've walked by so many beautiful mushroom, I call them fairy rings, right? The circular mycelium network that comes on the ground. And people have knocked them over on purpose because they can't stand to see them for whatever reason. Like there's a compulsion, or they see the line of ants and they have to squash them because they're coming into my space. The wilderness cannot come in here. It needs to be outside or I will destroy you. Or the spider web. How dare she create her intricate artistic orb of that's her survival mechanism. How dare she do that on my doorstep? And our the possibility of letting things be in nature, or our compulsion to destroy, to stop it from interfering with our professionally manicured lawn or our tidy marble that came from the earth, countertop, or our freshly painted white newel stoop.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Becky.
Perhaps we have time for one or two more.
This may be far afield, so forgive me if it doesn't make sense, but there is a kind of miracle that I'm thinking about the nightmare as wildness, and the uninvited guest who comes in the middle of dark to wake us up, to frighten us, to bring images that we might not want to look at forward, that keeps us from falling back to sleep. You know, it's easy to romanticize the wild god as something to invite, and maybe that's what we should do. But invited or not, the god appears. That's a bad version of Jung. So Jacqueline, we don't know each other. So I, you know, in a way, I'm responding to you because I know what you mean about being tired of being strong and courageous and neat, maybe. But what I've learned in my own life is that even so, or because of that, the wild god will visit, the psyche will present that god energy of crazy to throw off the porcelain and the good manners so that another energy can be released. I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm feeling into this. Yeah, good enough.
Yeah.
There's a reason. There's a reason why in college we have wild parties on the weekends.
I wonder if I'm too old to be wild again. You know, I've got all the health issues and
Trust
stuff.
me, that god is a lot older than you are. Trust me on that. I don't know much, but I know that.
Write that down.
Yeah. No, and there is a line in the middle of this poem. If you go back and read it later, see there's a line in the middle of the poem which is really poignant, where the energy actually turns. It says, and what happened? When did I become so old that I lost all my passions, or something to that effect? And then the poem kind of takes a turn. So that's kind of the fulcrum. If you think about, you know, a seesaw, that's the fulcrum. And
I think we're so used to like the sanitized versions of what is holy and what is sacred, that dirt underneath your fingers is not clean and that's not good. And these dark places, and with this, you know, feral energy and this primal parts of ourselves, this is holy to me. These are holy words to me. It's not a nightmare to me. But although I understand, and you know, there's no judgment of anyone's reactions. For me, it's this is beauty. Yeah.
And whether holy or not, it's here. That's the other thing. We like it, we dislike it, we think it's holy, we think it's demonic. Bottom line, it is here.
Yes,
What
it's
do I do
definitely
with it?
life.
And it recognizes you. And it calls you and it speaks to you. And you should not repel it. It's a part of you.
You
Thank
engage. Yeah, as the Jungians will say, you engage the God. You don't give away your sense of self either. You don't become a doormat for this God, but nor do you push the God away. You enter a conversation. You enter a dance. And that's exactly what this God wants. Wants to dance with your dog, wants to dance with you.
And perhaps aspects of our shadow selves.
Exactly. Like, go ahead and have that reading. It won't turn you into anything. It might illuminate something, you know. Go ahead and try that. It'll be okay.
Susie, I see your hand up.
I know we ran out of time, but what keeps coming back to me is that the wife is upstairs and the husband's downstairs. And that, could you do another segment on that?
Can you maybe say 30 seconds to what's coming up for you with that image?
A separation, not helping each other, not being in tune with each other. He's downstairs experiencing this amazing thing, good, bad, definitely not indifferent. And she's upstairs. She's removed.
And he closes the door.
Yeah. And how often do we push away the other in us?
But she's also not removed, because there's that part where she's exultant and
Weeping at the same time.
she's
Yeah.
very much responding to this duende.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think, or maybe the portal of it. Who knows?
Yeah. And that's what would happen to the anima, animus, whatever term we want to use for the inner other that's pushed away. It's going to keep responding and responding stronger and stronger, but maybe outside of our conscious conversation. So yeah, maybe part 2, as you say.
Well, and so before we move to our close, I just want to thank you all for being here, because I think it takes a community to hold. I know that I needed a community to hold this poem and this image, and Sushmita and I are doing a workshop together called Pushing the Boundary of the God Image. It's going to be in toward the end of February. So it would be lovely to see some of you all there, if that works out. And Sushmita, do we want to do like our word or phrase?
Yes, let's do. Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Taking a moment, I think, to do that.
So if people want, somebody had to leave, I think. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, you leaving too?
Bye,
Okay,
Susie.
bye.
Okay.
So whoever is here, if you want to check out with a word or a phrase,
Yeah.
just a word or a phrase that holds the energy for this evening.
Grateful.
The great unnameable beasts in your liver and your kidneys and your heart.
Too many words, Lisa.
Of course I would do that with you. It is a phrase. It qualifies.
I know. I loved it.
No, I'm playing with Lisa because we have a long history of.
It's an inside story.
I would have to close by saying
Howling.
that I'm the wife and I engaged, and that's why I'm who I am today. And I'll leave it for part 2 and explain that.
I would say connected.
Embracing the wilderness of my heart.
I want to just take a deep breath and open. Anyone else?
Yeah, I don't know, I don't have a word or a phrase, but I have this feeling that in spite of all the things that are going wrong with this world, we're doing something right to be able to have this conversation. It's definitely not a word or a phrase.
Okay, blessings. Thank you. Night. Bye.
His voice makes vinegar from